calm. Romans 12, hopefully, if you've been about, you will have automatically turned your Bibles or your phones or your attention to Romans 12, making our way slowly through this chapter. I really think it's an important one. Obviously, it's in the Bible, but I really think it's important for us at the minute how we be church. It's a challenge to us as individuals and as a family, as a community of faith. As we talked about the very first week, we introduced this with the idea that Romans 12 verse 1, it is to us as individuals, present your bodies, present yourselves as a living sacrifice to the Lord. But Paul was writing this to all of the churches, all the house churches scattered across Rome. And so he was saying to the churches, present yourselves, present your communities as a living sacrifice before the Lord. And so continue to have that in your minds as we make our way through this chapter. Let me read where we've been. Therefore, I urge you, brothers, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. This is your spiritual act of worship. Do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be, and this is where we were last week, then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. So here we are this week. Last week stressed, I guess, the importance of the mind as it is renewed in the transforming process. And here, verse 3 is maybe going to give us a wee bit more about how we think. For by the grace given me, I say to every one of you, do not think of yourself more highly than you ought, but rather think of yourself with sober judgment in accordance with the measure of faith God has given you. There's a couple of places in Proverbs where it tells us about be really careful about how you think, because how you think, the way that you think, it's going to really govern the direction, the course of your life. Be careful how you think. I think there's a version, be careful how you think. Your life is shaped by your thoughts. Proverbs 4. And so we want to reflect a wee bit on that this morning. Just to back up a wee bit, for by the grace given me. Just wanted to acknowledge that. Paul here is speaking out of grace. It's almost like he's speaking outside of himself. The whole way through this letter, grace, and even through most of Paul's writings, grace is the key to everything. Grace is the key to everything in this letter, the unfailing, unrelenting love of God. And so Paul is not engaging with the church here. He's not approaching them from look what I have done. He's not approaching them from some hierarchical position. He's speaking out of grace. He wants them to know that. He wants them to know that all that's happened to him and all that's gone on in him and all that he has been involved in has all been grace. It's all been because of the unfailing, unrelenting love of God. And so he's not speaking over them in some position. He's not backing up all that he has done, because he's recognized in his own life that it's all been about grace. It's all grace. And what he's going to try and do, I believe, in this thought, this verse, is to try to remind them all that are listening, all that are listening to this letter, and even us here again, 2,000 years later, each person will contribute to the community of faith by learning to think well, by learning to think appropriately, by learning to think in the way that we ought. And so I'm going to assume that for most of us in the room, that the first half of this verse is maybe the one that we're most familiar with. especially if you've grown up in Northern Ireland or even Northern Ireland evangelical world, do not think more highly of yourself than you ought. We're familiar with that, and it's right. We want to heed the warning of not to have an exaggerated opinion of yourself. I think it is really important for us to heed this warning, if you will, that what happens when you place yourself at the center of everything. It feels almost Christianity 101, but sometimes the things that we know don't always make their way to our hearts and how we live. But all that you have, every one of us in this room, all that you have, all that you are is by grace. And so if there's any reason not to be too proud, not to think too highly of yourself, it is in that basic fact alone that all that you have has been given to you. All that you are is out of sheer grace, is because you're so loved by a good Father. But it's this idea that is like to continue to just the thing that has caused me to think most deeply on this week is this idea of thinking with sober judgment. Because I think that what I would want you to hear today is, I do want you to hear, don't think more highly of yourself than you ought. But the idea of thinking with sober judgment is not to think more lowly of yourself than you ought to either. And I think that is what Paul is communicating with this idea of thinking with sober judgment. The problem with the English for us is that whenever we read the word sober judgment, I think we have in our minds, it's almost this stern, we're very stern with ourselves in order to make sure that pride doesn't sink in. I can't think of any other word than stern at the minute. That's just the word, and it won't clear off to allow another word in. But just like we're very somber, sober, stern with ourselves, and that's what comes to mind, I think, when we read to think with sober judgment. Be really hard on ourselves so that pride doesn't sink in. And there's an element of truth to that, but there was just a version, I think it was the J.B. Phillips version, that talked about sound judgment. There was other versions that talked about instead of sober judgment, they used sound judgment. It was the J.B. Phillips version that said to try to have sane estimate of our capabilities. Try to have a sane estimate of our capabilities. And what I'm wanting to suggest to you is in this an estimate of our abilities. I want you to think about it as one that acknowledges your worth as valuable people in God's plan for the whole of this community. Valuable people as a valuable person in God's plan for the whole of the community. And his plan, as we reflected briefly on last week, his plan which is good and it's pleasing and it's perfect. So absolutely, we are nothing outside of his grace. So don't think higher of yourself than you ought to. But it's this same grace, it's that same grace that chose us for something. It's that same grace that chose us to bring something unique within the body. So we dare not. I actually scribbled it out in my notes here. So don't dare. But felt I can't say that. So I altered it slightly, just so you know. So we dare not. We dare not think more lowly either. So nothing outside of his grace. If nothing else lands, we're nothing outside of his grace. So don't think higher than you should. But it's the same grace. It's the same grace that chose us for something. It's the same grace that has uniquely placed something within us so that we dare not think more lowly either. And I think sometimes maybe with this idea of the stern, sober judgment that we're probably pretty good at. I would say, looking around the room, we're pretty good at the stern, sober judgment. But what do we miss? We miss something of what Paul's trying to get through to us in so much of his letters, the joy and the freedom that comes with knowing the uniqueness of who we are and what we offer, what he created us for. And so I want you to have a sane estimate of who you are, a sane estimate, sound judgment with who you are and what you offer. And I again, I have no problem doing this because I'm within family, but sometimes I don't delight in that enough. I don't delight in that enough because I spend too much of my time, hopefully not as much as I used to. Hopefully, you're getting into your 40s, you don't compare yourself as much, but I still do. Still get sucked into the comparison trap. But sometimes we don't delight in the uniqueness of who we are and the uniqueness of what we offer, because we end up getting caught in comparing ourselves with others. And that's why I will continue to go back to Paul is communicating this. It is for us as individuals, but it is equally as much for us as a community, as a family. Offer your Christian communities, offer your Christian families as an offering. So I'm desperate for this in my own life. I'm desperate for this in all of your lives, that you would recognize your absolute importance in the body. And again, I'm sure that this is talk. The words that are coming out of my mouth now are familiar, I'm sure, to many of you. I'm desperate at the land that you would recognize your absolute importance in the body. If you aren't here, and so this isn't like, I think maybe people would like want to communicate this, like if you don't, to guilt trip people in, maybe not to showing up on a Sunday. Don't hear that. Please don't hear that. But you need to know that if you aren't here, and I don't mean here on a Sunday, but if you're not present, if you're not participating, active, don't hear that as like having it all worked out, being perfect, being like knowing what you're about, knowing what you're doing. That's not what I'm saying either. I'm saying that if you're not here, if you're not showing up, your particular function is missing. And the pain of that is that you miss out. You miss out in doing the very thing that he has uniquely called you and created you to be. But because your function is so necessary to the body, then the body, we miss out as well. And so in some ways it's a humbling thing to say, but it's so true that I could look every one of you in the eye today. I'm not going to do it because it would get really awkward, looking you in the eye and telling you that I need you. But I do, it's true. Maybe say it to Judith. You're the only one who can fill your place in our family. And there's something about that, again, I'm familiar, I love the body analogy of the church. Love how Paul fleshes it out further in 1 Corinthians. Just recognized over the last couple of days that this is the one thing that helps balance pride and low self-esteem for me. I have something unique to bring. And just in case you think too highly of yourself, I have something unique to bring, but I need you to bring yours too. There's just something about that I recognize. I can't get too proud, because anything that I have to offer will only ever be completely fulfilled if you do your bit as well. And so in church, in family, in the body, we work out our sense of self. We work out this estimate of our capabilities together. We are who we are. I read this week. We are who we are as individuals because of our place in the whole. And so almost in line of the comparison thing. I've just even continue to reflect on that for a moment. The measure of faith given. Again, this is an area where it maybe can become really easy to compare yourself to other people. But I was thinking about Luke 17 this week, and probably most famously has those words from Jesus when he says, if you have the faith the size of the mustard seed, you can say to this mountain to be moved. And that is a good verse, of course it is. Jesus said it, but the context of what is going on in Luke 17 is in the context of obedience. And sometimes I've went to those verses to almost like question the size of my faith, but I don't think that's what is going on there. I think that the question is not how much faith that we have, but are we obedient with what we have? And I think that lines up with this idea of the measure of faith that we've been given. God, thankfully, knows how much we can handle. And he gives us the appropriate measure of faith to serve him fully. And it should be very, very easy, even in my own world, to think about the idea of comparison. So Dad has faith for the world. I could compare myself and think, like, I need to measure up to that level of faith. That's not the measure of faith that I've been given, and maybe I could fall into the trap of comparing myself to that measure. But I don't think that is what's being asked. Will I be obedient with what has been given to me? My measure of faith is for this village, for this community. Sometimes it'll not even stretch to there. Sometimes it'll barely stretch to the four walls of my home. But if a measure of faith for this place, I could fall into the trap of saying, well, I don't have a measure of faith for anything bigger than that. I'm surrounded by people, thankfully, who have a measure of faith for Ireland. I'll surround myself with those people, but my measure of faith is for here. And so either I compare myself to others until I have a bigger measure of faith, or I be obedient with what I've been given. Recognize my own unique gift to the body, but also I need all of the measures and all of the giftings and that we have in the room for us to work this all out together. And so there's been something about that train of thought. Hopefully I've followed it through enough with me to see that there is a level of freedom. A level of freedom that you don't have to be like anybody else. So give yourself fully to being who you are within the whole of the community. No one else can do what you've been given to do. No one else can do what you have been called to do. And so just in case that would cause you to begin to think a bit more highly of yourself than you ought to, you also need to know that you can't do it fully if the whole community doesn't do it together. And so that balances out that level of pride. So don't think more highly of yourself than you ought to. And actually, I'm going to say it. Don't dare. Don't dare think more lowly of yourself than you ought to either. With sober judgment in accordance with the measure of faith God has given you. And so they're the thoughts and they're the challenges that I've felt from these verses for me today. And what I've valued about this study is that I feel the challenge of this. I feel the tensions, just as an individual following Jesus, but equally I'm feeling the challenges and the tension for us as a community and a family. And if we'll work these things out together, if we'll pursue these things together, we become more and more what he is uniquely called us and created us to be as individuals, but as a faith family, a community of faith. So the guys are going to come and finish off with one last song, and while we worship and finish off our time together, if you have any reflections you want to share them, please do. If you want someone to pray for you, I'll be down at the back, and I'm sure others will pray for you as well. But Father, please help us. Holy Spirit, would you come and challenge and comfort and provoke something within us. God, give us a fresh longing, a fresh desire to be and to do what you've called and created us to do. Would you give us a fresh appreciation, fresh recognition that what we have to offer is so vital to the function of the whole. So God, in light of all of that, I'm just incredibly grateful for every person in this room. Grateful for them, but also recognize that I need them. And so God, would you help us to bring, as we function together, to bring hope and life and the person and the words and ways of Jesus to our village, to our county, to our nation and beyond, for the honor and glory of your name, Jesus. Amen.